I appreciate our tourism community. I appreciate our hoteliers.
The following show and broadcast is a production of Better Savannah, an independent expenditure committee dedicated to better policy outcomes at the state and local level. The views, opinions, and statements made by the hosts and or guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Better Savannah. Hello, Francis.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hey, it's our pleasure.
Sorry about that. I'm going to switch over here to my
I got you, Chuck.
production, or the one I'm actually going to sit in here. Let's see, did I get video going? There it is.
Francis, your resume reads it's a stunner, man. You have really been in deep for a long time on justice issues, and you're I mean, how does it feel after all these years of being at the forefront of change and good public policy?
Well, those of us who believe in it cannot rest until it truly comes. And so we've seen some very positive signs of progress. And while so much has changed, so much fundamentally has remained the same. Too many of our children don't believe that their best days are ahead. Too many of our families believe that the burden of this country is unfairly on their backs as opposed to being shared equally across our community or equitably across our community. And ultimately, we have to create the kind of environment where no one feels as if the law measures them by their race or by their class, and that we all have one rule of law. So there are things that give me great encouragement and things that continue to motivate my desire to see change.
Well, Dr. Johnson, do you want us to call you Dr. Johnson? I've known you a long time. I know John is meeting you tonight, but I've known you for, hard to believe, like 13 years since I was in college. How's Statesboro been doing? The last time I drove through there, it's grown again by another leap and bound, it seems. I do keep up with Jonathan, with Mayor McCollar, on his social media. How are things in your hometown?
Well, things are looking up for Statesboro and across Georgia, where we have active and engaged mayors like Jonathan McCollar, who understand that rural America is the heart and soul of this country, and are doing what they can locally, even while we have stagnation at the state and the national level on critical issues that would improve the quality of life. They're doing what they can. And that's a positive thing. Georgia Southern University is a connector between Statesboro, Savannah, and Hinesville, and continues to serve this area as an economic engine, along with the ports of Savannah and this region's attraction for folks to settle here and raise their families. It bodes well for this community and other communities if we can take advantage of this moment.
Well, you know, I wonder. I just want to ask one more question about Statesboro before we move on, because there's so much we could talk about. But I remember when I was there from 2007 to 2011 before I moved here, that there was a lot of tension between students and the city. This played itself out. I don't know if you remember this specifically, but it took 10 years to get a polling site on campus.
Sure.
And that was a large fight about Fair Road and the church across the street as the precinct. And I can just remember how those tensions, how high they were. And I'm just wondering, has that improved in the last decade since I left?
Well, I'm not sure if it has improved. What I will say is that students and young people, people who believe that more voices are needed in the search for the common good and are welcomed or should be welcomed into democracy, didn't give up. They were persistent. And through that persistency, they elected a mayor and then elected a majority of the city council who is student focused and driven at celebrating and lifting the very students who fuel the economy here. And it was young people across this country who showed up in record numbers and changed the direction of this country by electing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and showed up again in a runoff election and sent Raphael, Warnock, and John Ossoff to the United States Senate. And I think young people have something to say about the critical issues of environment, of racial equity, of how we're going to move in this democracy against some pretty tough odds, and are showing that courage will not skip this generation. So I'm encouraged every time I see young people press the issue, and they've made real change over the last decade.
Chuck, can I make a quick comment? Francis, I just came back from a week in California. I visited 5 different friends, and every single house that I was in of friends, Georgia is on the map with that turning blue for Biden, and particularly for the 2 Senate races. And they are rethinking the stereotypes of Georgia and are just very appreciative of the fact that we delivered in that senatorial election. So it's being noticed and it's being appreciated.
Yes, yeah, it probably takes me back to an old hymn of the church. I'm a pastor, an attorney, and educator, and it says, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares have we thus far come." It has really been a real fight, the fight of our lives to move Georgia. We call it the New Georgia. I lead as chairman of the board of directors of the New Georgia Project, which was founded by Stacey Abrams as a transformational organization, power building organization, and then led by Reverend Raphael Warnock. Both resigned their chairmanships to run for governor and for Senate, respectfully. And I'm the 3rd chairman. And that work has really been about doing the hard work of building infrastructure that can respond to citizens' demand for more inclusion in the discussion about what's good for their communities 365 days of the year. This was not an election strategy that turned Georgia blue. This was an empowerment strategy focused on empowering the least likely voters, people who had been written off by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and getting them engaged, giving them candidates they could believe in, and showing them where the victory line was. And when you do that, people, Americans, have a powerful way of showing that their faith is strong in democracy. And so they showed up despite a pandemic, despite record voter suppression at the highest levels, including from the bully pulpit of the presidency, and against all of the odds, they grabbed 2 United States Senate seats in a historic election. And if that wasn't enough, flipped Georgia blue for Joe Biden and sent a strong signal that the New Georgia is here to stay.
Well, I can remember, Francis, I can remember when, this kind of started when I was in an undergrad. I think Stacey Abrams was elected in 2006 to the House and quickly rose to prominence. And you could see kind of the machinations at the beginning of this with the Steve Goldens and Joel Mendelsons, like that. Everybody from that end of 2000s and the beginning of the teens, the aughts here, there was a lot of involvement. I want to start with kind of that, where you sit. I mean, you sit at the crossroads of a premier political organizer, leader, a qualified, bona fide civil rights, voting rights expert and advocate, and also an accomplished legal scholar. And so at those 3 crossroads of those kind of 3 areas, I'm wondering the two things I think are most pressing for the world I think you work in and fight in every day in Georgia here are the legal fight against SB 208 and redistricting. Am I off base on those two being probably the two most pressing things?
No, I think you're right that those are very important things. But at the same time, we got to fight every day for citizens to have clean air and water to drink. We've got to make sure that we fight for inclusion in government and for transparency. And that's at every level where government and the people who run it want to shield their actions from public scrutiny. Every day we got to fight for a fairer and more accessible court where people are treated with dignity and respect. And so the fights over redistricting and over the voting rights of this state are important. But in terms of the everyday run of life, there are many, many areas that we have to continue to press on all of those fronts. But with that being said, make no mistake about it, the New Georgia Project filed legal challenge to what I call the Jim Crow Resurrection Act, SB 202, which was a Frankenstein bill combining the worst elements of voter suppression in the state and around the country in one bill. We filed a lawsuit before Governor Kemp's signature dried on that dusty parchment. Why? Because we knew it violated the 14th Amendment. We knew that it violated statutory law as it relates to making America's elections fairer and more open. And we knew that ultimately it's an insurance policy for those folks who don't believe in democracy, who are getting ready to set up a system where they can govern as an apartheid government without the popular will of the people. And they can do that through the tricks and chicanery that they've engaged in thus far, which has allowed them to not win more than 2 national elections in the last 30 years and still claim the presidency at 4 different occasions in that same period of time. The same tricks that allow them to not be a majority in this country's popular vote, but still hold an unequitable amount of power in the Senate and in the House of Representatives through gerrymandering, and what they hope will ensure that they stay in power long after their tired and worn out ideas are discarded. And we simply won't stand for it. Democracy is too important, and the right to vote and the right to have fair districts where people can elect candidates of their choice is too fundamental to our democracy to not fight for.
Chuck's got a call.
Sorry, I had to turn that ringer off. I don't know who that is. It's getting late for phone calls. But I just want to follow up, and I want to connect what you just said to kind of what's facing us here. You know, we are just a local group of people. One of the reasons I love what happened in Georgia the last 10 years is because it didn't happen through the Democratic Party. It happened through people.
I think we have a glitch.
Yeah, we're having some sound issues.
Yeah, Chuck is. Let me continue that thought.
Sure.
Do you think this amazing election result that we just talked about is the momentum going to sustain itself and deliver again, or was that kind of a anti-Trump one-off energy to get out and vote? What do you think?
I appreciate the question. You know, both things could be true. Sure. I think there was an unprecedented backlash and repudiation against Trump and what he stood for in this country. And I think the people he targeted showed him better than they could tell him by showing up to the polls and saying to Donald Trump, "You're fired." So I think it was a lot of that. And that's reflected in the exit polls. That's reflected in the drop in the popularity of 45 of the ex-president. But I think it's more than that. It's more than that. First-time voters, people who hadn't voted in more than 10 years, people who had checked out of the political process altogether, didn't put signs in their yard and make T-shirts on their own and rally in a runoff election to send John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to the United States Senate because of Donald Trump. They were not voting because of what Donald Trump had done in the past. They were voting for what they believed could be done when people come together. And that's what government is, people coming together. What could be done to improve their lives in the future. And so I deeply believe that there is a motivation by people who are determined to not cede the powers of government over to the few, the oligarchy that has held it for so long, but want to try a different approach and want to include many voices. So we are working every day. We didn't take a day off. We're working every day to make sure that those results are reflected in this year's municipal elections, and of course, in the rematch of the century when it comes to Stacey Abrams versus Brian P. Kemp in 2022.
Has Stacey Abrams announced that she's running for governor?
Let me tell you something about Stacey Abrams, my good friend of long standing. She will announce when she is good and ready. She will do what she wants to do. And that's what makes people like me love her so much, is that she's not moved by the politic of all of this, but she is laser focused on doing as much good as she can where she is. And right now she's doing that through Fair Fight, which is a great group fighting across this country to make fairer elections. And we couldn't be more proud of the work that she's doing.
Great. Chuck, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I think everything's stable again. I don't know what happened. Sorry about that, but I heard the parts of the conversation there. Sure. So you were mentioning, Francis, about strong language, apartheid governments. I mean, we got the whole Palestine-Israel thing going on. We talk about that, but again, we're focused on local stuff here in Savannah, and we've had I don't know if you've noticed. I've talked to you a few times about it the last year and a half. Yeah. We got a pretty bitterly divided city council in Savannah, and Senator Lester Jackson has always told me the real power is always with the city because of its position and its financial impacts, $400 million a year kind of organization proposition. Yeah. So, we had a rules change package for the first time in like 18 years, the first 3 months of the term. And it created this situation where unless you had the acceptance of the mayor or city manager, you had to basically have 5 votes to get something onto the pre-published agenda that goes out. I'm not asking you to criticize anybody personally. I'm just asking your thoughts on if that's too draconian for 21st century government.
Well, I'm not beyond being critical. I don't think anybody would ever say that about me. And we should let the chips fall where they may. Sure. That's up to the voters of Savannah. Savannah is a beautiful place. And, we recently set up an office there. We have an office in Decatur, Statesboro, and Savannah with Davis, Bozeman, Johnson Law. And what I really see is strong and passionate public servants, both for those who are allied with the mayor and those who, people might believe are allied against the mayor. I don't necessarily believe that's true. And I think that democracy is not a spectator sport, but it requires people to get in and mix it up and knock around ideas and figure out what works best for Savannah. So I wouldn't put too much on the divide that appears. I think what unites all of the folks who are in power, and I know them all, I've worked with them all, is a love and desire to see Savannah move forward. That doesn't mean it can't be messy on the edges and that sharp elbows don't fly. But you don't get into politics unless you can weather those kinds of things. As relates to what can get on the agenda or not, I'm always for the inclusion of more ideas. And I'm always for the inclusion of the voices of those who may be in the minority on a point of view, because often things that were in the minority point of view ultimately are ideas that can be revisited or later are proven to have been the best course of action in the first place. And so Ruth Bader Ginsburg teaches us that her whole career was about writing the most appropriate dissent. And so I would just urge everyone, regardless if you're on city council, if you're running a local parish council for your church, or if you are you just operating in your family dynamic, to include as many voices because they make for better decisions.
Let me follow up, and John, I want to get your thoughts on this too, John. I kind of view the political power as it's like a 3-step process. There's first principles, there's principled negotiation or compromise, principled compromise. Everybody should be for that. And then the last step, if you can't get those two done, is highlight differentiation, right? And this rules package has eliminated that third leg. When you can't force a vote to show where people are, I have said that the mayor and the majority who changed that rules package, that it was the Mitch McConnellization of Savannah city government, in that when you hold the keys to what gets voted on, you hold the keys to a lot of the political outcomes in the future. And that's kind of, I think, my biggest problem. If you want to vote it down, vote it down. Let the people see where everybody stands. So that way we can sort it out. Like you said, the voters can sort it out. But my fear is that if this rules package goes unchallenged the remainder of this term, we'll have a situation where there's not enough evidence to show the differentiation. Am I on the wrong track here?
No, you're not. The Hastert rule that operates in the House of Representatives was a great example of that you couldn't bring anything to the floor if it didn't have a majority of the majority caucus, which
the majority of the majority. Yep.
Yes. And so, there were principled reasons that I always opposed the Hastert rule. And at the same time, there are reasonable exceptions that the majority on both sides have used to deny a vote when it could be embarrassing or could show and highlight a place in their policy where there's a gap, or when the public may not be as educated on an issue, and that's politics. And so what I would urge the citizens of Savannah to do is to continue to let your voice be heard about any issue. And as those issues take popular root in the will of the people, any good politician worth their salt is going to respond to it. And so that's what you've got to do. If we stopped every time somebody told us no, then we would never made any progress. But when they say no, we say, we'll show you better than we can tell you. And you go and you build the kind of public sentiment that is expressed through the public will, that forces politicians to do what they claim they would never do. And one great example of this, I can remember back at the beginning of my tenure as regional director for the NAACP, when I managed the NAACP across the Southeast United States. I was sitting in a meeting with state officials in South Carolina who told me about the Confederate flag that flew over the State House, that it would never come down. It would never come down. And I remembered those words, and I was there to witness it come down finally. And I was asked by a reporter, "What does it feel like today?" I said, "Today I get to know what never looks like, because I was told it would never come down, and I guess today is never." So what I mean to say to those who are listening is continue to press, continue to organize your neighborhood associations, continue to press your aldermen and women, and continue to push on those issues. And politicians will respond, or you'll vote them the hell out of office, one way or the other.
I've got two.
From your lips to God's ears.
I've got two quick postscripts here. Francis, unfortunately, on this rules package change, hit dog will holler, right? And the media, the local media, almost exclusively, has not reported on why half a council is being fussy and demanding and all those other adjectives for acting up and not being polite. Well, they've got good reason to. And to your point and story, they just have to be patient and believe that one day it will come down. And we believe that one day the rules package will be fixed, either through a charter change or through some realization amongst the other colleagues on council that this isn't equitable or fair, and it's not good for transparency and the public's interest. That's point one. Point two is a question I have for you, and I've been here 28 years. The local NAACP, Francis, had a pretty lackluster history, if I can say that, locally here in Savannah, Chatham.
In the immediate history, you mean? You mean in the immediate history. Let's be clear about that.
Well, I'm thinking about the last 8 or 10 years. There were lots of issues that the local branch was kind of silent on. But I understand there's new leadership, and I'm hoping that there'll be a more engaged and visible presence. So,
well, the NAACP in Savannah is the oldest NAACP branch in this state. It was actually chartered in 1917 by James Weldon Johnson, who was then the field secretary, came up from Jacksonville and chartered the branch in Savannah. James Weldon Johnson, by the way, is the author of the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Okay.
And so it has a storied past, the likes of Ralph Martin Gilbert and W.W. Law, and others like Prince Jackson and Al Scott, who when he was first elected was the first since Reconstruction, and went on to chair the Ports Authority and be chair of the County Commission, and so the NAACP's best work is often done behind the scenes and out of the camera. Matter of fact, if we do our work well, few people know about it. And that's what I would say when I was in leadership in the NAACP. I am inspired by new leadership in Chad Mance and others. The NAACP is a reflection of the community. And Savannah's African-American community is one of the oldest communities in Georgia with free Black people. Educated Black people, wealthy Black people, and their interests are variegated and diverse. And so it is a conservative branch, to say the least, out of the branches in Georgia. And I've had a good vantage point to view that. Let me say this: the NAACP doesn't dominate the social justice space like it once did. And there are other groups that are doing meaningful work and much more progressive work in Savannah. And I've been just so incredibly inspired by their work as well. And so I think civil rights, social justice, and the issue of equity are on the forefront. The NAACP is a part of that, but at the same time, there's so many other relevant voices, younger voices, voices of specific communities that have needs that need to be redressed, like the LGBTQ community, as well as immigrant communities and new American communities that need to be heard as well. And so we continue to look to the NAACP for a legacy leadership. At the same time, there's so many other organizations that are moving the agenda forward.
Thank you.
Well, Francis, help us out. We're just a couple of gringos, that have a bent for, you know me a long time. I've always kind of had a bug for the political world and for kind of more economic. I've kind of always been on this economic justice track, and we've seen this play out in the broader left of center coalition in America the last two presidential cycles with the Bernie Hillary, Bernie Biden. There is an obvious age kind of predictor of where people are headed politically. I have heard John McMasters, who founded this organization, I've heard him called the Bernie Sanders of Savannah on more than one occasion. I don't think it's just the glasses and the hair, buddy. But, how can we bridge the gap because basically Better Savannah we have a policy platform of like 7 to 10 things. I mean, these are big ticket items that are very much about income inequality, who we subsidizing the winners, term limits to keep things in check. How do we start bridging the gap between a progressive economic agenda, which will help ultimately solve the social justice and justice issues that everyone is concerned about? I don't think that they can be unlinked. I think they're inextricably linked. And I find that political leaders, thought leaders who don't make the connection, at least partially, I think they're just missing the whole picture to the audience.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we have to start, first of all, with an analysis of how we got here. And it's not been by happenstance or by neglect. It is the intentional desires as expressed through determined action to keep young people disengaged, to keep communities of interest from coming together, and to keep power out of the hands of those who desperately need it to change their lives. And so when we start with that notion, we fundamentally tell the truth about this country that a group of oligarchs, met in Philadelphia and discarded the Articles of Confederation. I'm not arguing that wasn't the best course of action, and pressed a government upon the people that they called a democracy. At its very core, it only allowed white landowning men to participate. At its core, it denied the franchise to women and to the very people who had helped the European settlers to live. It denied them even their basic humanity. So what we can do is tell the truth that we're not here by happenstance. And then we can begin to intentionally work at creating a new paradigm. And that paradigm is built on a consistent education of young people that the vote, and not just the vote, the role of citizen is critical, and that we all have a responsibility. Is not left to just those at City Hall, under the Gold Dome, or in Washington, but it is our job to make this country what it ought to be. And we can do that through electoral process, but there's so many other ways we can do that. We can do that through the church, or the mosque or temple or synagogue. We can do that through nonprofit organizations like the New Georgia Project and Fair Fight and Better Savannah. We can do that through our neighborhood associations. But to say that we are not going to do anything because we cannot do everything is not consistent with the history of how we brought change in this country. And so more and more young people are getting involved. There were 10 million young voters who cast their ballot in 2020. But at the same time, an analysis by the Center for Information Research on Civic Learning and Engagement found that young people still lack information on how to vote by mail. And so if there's a group who says, what can I do? You can educate people about, young people particularly, on how they can vote by mail. And that would indeed address a real critical issue that we weren't able to successfully get at in this last election. The analysis also found that young people were more likely to vote later in the cycle than earlier in the cycle. And so making sure that they understand deadlines and drop-offs, that's powerful civic engagement work if an organization wants to take it up. Is it glamorous? Is it sexy? Does it get you throwing mud at people? No. But it is critical for, really empowering more and more young people. And of course, when you consider young people, if you focus on young people who have disabilities, young people who have mobility issues, and just try to move the needle, move a precinct, change a location in one way to impact just that demographic, and what kind of major change would that have over the system. And so there are lots of people in the center of our public square hollering at each other. There are people on city council who are bickering. There are people in the General Assembly who, are trading political shots, and people in Washington, D.C. who are passing body blows every day. And we need to remember that's a small group. The vast majority of Americans truly are not even activated. But there is a big group of people like you, and don't ever say that what you're doing is not important, who are pushing in every way that they can to make this the country that we want it to be. In conclusion, I'll say this. I do know this fundamentally, that the world we want will not be built by the men who have so much invested in the world that we have. And so you have to have change agents, game changers, people who say it starts with me and what I have influence over and what I have control over. And if you change your house and then work by changing your block and then your neighborhood and your city, then one day we will look back and be proud of the work that we began.
I like it.
I love it. I love it. Well, I appreciate your time. Could you send us we'll put a link into the show description for
Sure.
New Georgia Project and stuff, so everybody can find out how to support the efforts that you are having right now.
Sure.
Did you have one more question, John?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Francis, for your insight, your leadership, your perseverance. I very much enjoyed the reference to the Articles of Confederation because, Francis, I think if Savannah had its way, we wouldn't have a constitution. We'd still be operating under the Articles of Confederation. And
well, yeah, maybe Savannah would still be a British colony, given the real history of it.
Well,
it was a holdout.
Yeah, they are holding out, and they're very resourceful. But
Sure.
much like Alexander Hamilton, we are federalists, if you will, and we realize that it just can't exist and continue on without some changes for the public good. Whether we need to pay our armies that Washington had not that hadn't seen a paycheck in a couple of years, or a banking system, or trying to create parity in tariffs at the coastal ports of the United States. Yes, we're very much federalists and see a bigger picture for the common good. So thank you.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate everything, Francis.
Absolutely. Let's end with a great Alexander Hamilton quote.
Please.
He is known as having said that a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Absolutely. A nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. And when we look at politicians who can stay in office despite their lack of response to the people who send them, when we look at corrupt officials who want to operate outside of transparency in the sunlight of day, when we look at folks who abuse and the trust of people who send them with a sacred obligation, then we would do well to consider Alexander's words and indeed take our government back. And we have orderly revolutions. They're called elections.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed.
Well, before you leave, I'll quote the great Dennis Green, former coach of the Arizona Cardinals. I say the Bears are who we thought they were. Thanks for coming on, Francis. We'll have to talk to you soon, okay?
Absolutely. You all take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
All right. Let's take a quick break, John, and then we'll come back and chat.
Okay. How long's the break?
I'll give like 3 minutes.
Okay.
I appreciate our tourism community. I appreciate our hoteliers.
All right, we're back. So I was watching these videos, our little bumpers, before and during the middle of the show. All right, we're back. And so I think that we're going to have to update them because today, during the city council workshop, there was a first major discussion, and I'm thinking we should do a good part of our show next week on this. We were talking about this earlier. I want to clip some of that workshop out and talk about it.
Sure.
And then I'm going to reach out and email Alderwoman Keisha Gibson Carter because she had some great comments. One thing that we didn't get to talk about with Francis, I wanted to, but I forgot. But I just want to talk to you about with our audience here real quick before we end the show. Was you were in California during this week, but if you were in Savannah earlier this week, especially Tuesday and Wednesday, what dominated the political landscape, social media feeds, was this freaking container ship.
A dragon.
You called it a dragon, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a dragon snaking up the river.
Yep.
So every politician went down there, right?
Yeah.
And so did a lot of citizens. And I described it to you as like an ambulance coming by. It makes one noise when it's coming towards you and one noise when it's going away. And so in the lead up to this is the largest container ship to ever dock in Savannah. In the lead up to this was all this puff and, John's cat's making an appearance. All this huff and puff. Amazing records, and then as soon as it kind of docked, people started to have like a more balanced conversation. And, Jim Marikas, friend of the show, put up a really good post. And out of all the politicians I saw down there making live videos, only like Keisha and Alicia Miller-Blakely, Alderwoman at Large, who is a member of ILA, only they were talking about equity. There's no equity on that boat. I think Keisha put a hashtag or she said something like this boat is not lifting all tides or something, the play on that rise, tide rising lifts all boats. So I just very interested in your thoughts as you witnessed the social media frenzy from afar.
Well, the one thing that I was pleased to read and see were a commentary and perspective that went beyond the shortcomings here locally. You know, the fact that we gave up port container fees 30 years ago. People were saying, yeah, that ship's filled with unimportant, cheaply made stuff from China. Okay. I enjoyed that people were not just considering the immediate local shortcomings of our policy, but the larger implications for us as a 21st century nation, that our largest trading partner is sending us disposable junk. And what does that say about us as a country? And for how long, Chuck, have people said, yeah, we exported all our jobs and we're going to pay a price for it? Well, the price of it came upriver, and we greeted it like it was some sort of oracle or a peyote experience, that this gigantic monster crept up the river and was heralded by the village people. And then they realized what had happened, and they kind of came to their senses, and they kind of said, whoa, was that good or was that bad?
Right.
So I'm glad that enough people are beginning to realize that our policies, whether it be at local or state or national, have consequences.
Absolutely, 100%, all the time. I'm gonna try and share my screen here. I want to read this. My favorite take was from Enki Research, right?
Okay.
So this is Chuck Enki. Everybody follows him for like the hurricane advice stuff. Okay, so let me see.
I didn't realize it was the same guy, but yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Let me see if I can do this here. Yeah. Let's which tab is this? It's this one. Do you see my screen or no? I think they do. No?
Nope.
Oh, I gotta let myself in over here. Hang on. Oh God. How do I fix this? Let's do this. All right, you see that, John? You see it?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so this is from, and I'll put a link to this piece in the show notes. So this is from Enki's blog on WordPress, and I'm just gonna read a little bit of this section here, and then we'll talk some more about it. He's basically he was talking about two main implications. One is environmental, and the other one's economic. So the economic implications of this kind of global shipping is often hidden. During the studies of the deepening of the Savannah Harbor and periodically since, the Georgia Ports Authority, GPA, trots out economic analyses of the benefits of the port. I'll be blunt. These analyses are misleading, even bogus. One key problem is that all of the numbers about local jobs or regional impact overlooks the lost manufacturing jobs and the distortion of the U.S. economy from a balanced producer-consumer economy to a consumer-dominant economy supported by a service sector. This is one of the factors behind the increasing levels of disparity in income in the United States, the depressed middle-class sector in the country. Those middle-class manufacturing, repair service type jobs disappear since cheap goods means it is also often more cost-effective to import and replace rather than repair them when they fail or break. Of course, it is only cost-effective if you ignore the resources wasted in a throwaway world, but that's a different issue. You'll notice when GPA reports statistics, they talk about containers and tonnage exported or imported rather than the overall value of imports versus exports. If you run the numbers that way, billions of dollars a year, and therefore tens of thousands of manufacturing and other related jobs flow out of the U.S. to foreign countries, some hostile, such as China. In other words, China is treating the U.S. like an extractive colony, but the U.S. goes along with it because U.S.-based companies profit from the somewhat lower retail prices, even though the average person sees only marginal benefits. 10 or 20% lower prices doesn't mean much if your neighbors are either out of work or working lower paying jobs, or your taxes are high to cover social costs. You have to look at the whole society impacts, not just narrow sectors. One of the reasons behind the American Revolution was that Great Britain restricted certain kinds of manufacturing in the colonies. It makes sense from a colonial control standpoint. Extract the raw materials, force the colonies to buy the finished products. That way, the net value is not equal. Money flows out of the colony, enriches the mother country, makes the colony dependent on them. China has been doing this to the U.S. for 3 decades now, and we're actually cooperating with our own subjugation. So I guess I'm going to link that to the podcast notes and the show description so that people can get to read that whole article. But what he was describing definitely made me think about, this is the relationship between Savannah and Chatham County and the state of Georgia. You know?
Sure.
The state of Georgia extracts the cheap labor in the tourism industry, the well-paid labor in the shipping industry, and takes that labor and extracts it and provides the opportunity for profits for downline companies all over the Southeast. And we remain 28% impoverished, and remain, in a high growth area with poverty not decreasing. And I keep saying this on the call today for the city council. They were saying that there's 145,000 residents here, and that's going to continue to grow. If people think things are bad now, if the crime is bad to you now, at 145,000 residents with 28% of them being in poverty, imagine how bad it's going to be 10 years from now when we have 190,000 residents and 27 or 28% poverty.
Yeah.
You're going to be adding some zeros to the crime stats.
Yeah, just to your point about the history lesson there. Yeah. In the 15 and 1600s, the British controlled the Caribbean, and sugar cane was the largest export. So the Crown, Britain, would have the sugar cane sent over to Britain, and then the Crown would sell the refined sugar back to the colony.
That's right.
And that was all, for exactly as you laid out, a way to keep control over the colonies and make them dependent on the Crown. So it's sort of a modern day allegory to exactly the way colonialism worked 300 years ago. So yeah, good points.
Yeah, I felt like we wanted to respond to this because it was just such dominant in the conversation this week, and I hope that this generation of political leaders kind of has the same fight that yours did when the Port Harbor deepening was being proposed. Right? I mean, there was substantial pushback from the Steve Willises and the Sierra Clubs and the it's on the environmental impacts. And now it's not just the environmental impacts, it's the economic justice. I said when Alderwoman Keisha Gibson Carter was live on the riverfront, he's like saying there's no equity on that boat. I just love that line. I mean, this is true. It's a true story. So I thought that was interesting. Still nothing on a city manager. No updates there. Maybe we'll be able to ask Keisha about that next week. I haven't heard anything on the Friends of Forsyth Park thing recently. I'm hoping to hear some more about that. And then we're coming up on that 60-day clock on the Weeping Time archaeological survey. That's gonna be up in June here. So we got a lot of issues on the horizon. Still no word from Representative Stevens on whether he's going to resign that seat, House District 165. Yep. Again, so many things kind of cooking in the back burner. Sooner or later, something's going to kind of pop, right?
Right. No news on Mickey Stevens? Just write that out? Okay.
Nope. Well, look, guys, we appreciate you guys stopping by. We'll get this posted over to our Spotify. I've got everything up to date on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music podcasts. So I'll update this episode here in a little bit, and really appreciate it. Okay, thanks for stopping by. We'll be here next week for another weekly live show.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming by, guys. We'll talk to you next week.
I appreciate our tourism community. I appreciate our hoteliers.